Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 95 with Chris Graham. I had a great chat with Chris. We talked about a lot of things, including his journey from musician to mastering engineer. We talked about his unique approach to building his mastering business and how he's developed coding and extra skills along the way. We talked about his approach to mastering, how he's able to master using a laptop and headphones, why he doesn't think outboard gear is necessary anymore. And we also got into some more serious topics regarding mental health and his past experiences and how he's trying to grow from them. I think this is an important conversation. So with all that to say, here's my conversation with Chris Graham here on Secret Sonics. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Chris Graham. Chris is a mastering engineer and the owner of Chris Graham Mastering based out of Columbus, Ohio. He's also the founder of Bounce Butler, a software that helps audio people bounce audio files. And he's the co-host of the Six Figure Home Studio podcast, soon to be rebranded as the Six Figure Creative podcast. Am I right?
That's right, man.
And yeah, I first came upon Chris via his podcast, and I love the podcast. And we actually met up in person in Columbus, Ohio a few years ago, right before my cousin's wedding. And Chris was gracious enough to meet me then, and he's been gracious enough to join me on the podcast now. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Chris.
Ben, thank you so much. We were talking about this before, but I'll add this for your audience. When I first launched the Six Figure Home Studio with Brian, I had very low expectations. I was like, yeah, 500 people listen to it someday, I'll be happy. And there's well over that per day at this point that listen to it. And
Wow.
It was... You were the first person that ever reached out from the podcast as a listener. Was like, "Hey, could we hang out?" And I remember when that happened, I was just like, "A dude from Israel wants to meet me because I talk into a microphone and we record it with my friend." Cool,
Crazy. I was like, I don't know, should I do this? And my wife told me, like, you got to do this. You love this podcast. Just reach out. If he, like you said, like, you know, someone buys me lunch, I'll probably meet up with them. And I was like,
Yeah.
all right, let's do this. And you were super cool about it.
It's true. I wish more people would take me up on that.
And I remember sitting in that cafe with you, getting a coffee, and the coffee was so acidic that it turned my milk into like the curdle.
It is pretty acidic, yeah.
And I'm like, you know, Brian, the co-host of the Six Figure Home Studio, is going to kill me for this, but I'm actually a dark roast guy, and I like coffee that's not so acidic. So I was like,
Same.
I don't want to embarrass myself about, how I drink my coffee.
No, dude, you're fine.
I didn't say anything back then, but I'll tell you now on the air.
Well, and this is weird. I actually have been over a year with no coffee. And
oh my God.
I miss it because it's delicious, but caffeine and anxiety issues are not a great combination, I found out. And it's been good to not drink it every day, but I do miss it. It is delicious. Though
Yeah.
North Star Cafe, where we went, it is too acidic. It's got to be dark.
Yeah.
It's got to be full-bodied. It's got to have some nuttiness
All right.
and some almonds.
My man.
Yeah, dude.
My man.
AeroPress, am I right?
Sort of, but we'll get to that another time. I'm more of a pour over guy personally,
Okay,
but
okay.
the AirPress is cool. I actually got one recently. Whatever, we'll just talk about it because why not? Yeah, I got AirPress and it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. I think I prefer a good pour over, but whatever, you know.
I think as you lean into the AeroPress, that it will eventually pull you in over
as you
a pour over.
lean, as you physically lean.
Yeah,
into
you
it.
literally have to physically lean. My experience with the pour over is you get a more acidic cup with less boldness than you can get with an AeroPress if you are getting your grind size right and water temperature in particular. So like 175 degrees, not 180. Well, I don't know what that is in Celsius. You're in Israel. But as you get the temperature right and the grind size right, all of a sudden, I mean, you get no acid. And you can make a cup of coffee with an AeroPress and then take that cup of coffee and put it in the fridge and then go about your day. And the next morning, wake up, pull it out of the fridge and drink it cold. And it's spectacular. It's still so good. Any other coffee I've ever had is like you let it sit for any amount of time and it just turns into sock flavor. Like, it's so terrible. Anyways.
Oh,
Let's
Oh my
talk about
God.
audio. Ha ha!
Yeah, man. So, Chris, I mean, your story has been publicized on several podcasts, but maybe you give like a quick down low for my audience of just, how did music start for you and how did that kind of evolve into production?
Yeah, so for sure. So I, as a kid, had the great luckiness of having family members that were into hi-fi. And, my grandpa had a Fisher 400 amplifier. I know no one knows what that is. It's not like you shouldn't know what that is. I'm concerned if you do. But it was like in the 60s, it was like the first high-powered stereo amplifier that you could get for like your home. And my dad had this really amazing Kenwood amp, and he had these awesome Advent speakers, and he had great headphones, and we had this great record collection. So I would just listen to music sometimes and experiment with the record player. And when I was a kid, I like inadvertently got the stereo system like sounding really, really good. And I put on Stevie Wonder's songs in the key of life, and Sir Duke came on. And that just, I think it's a doubled tenor sax and a trumpet that dun 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 dun, and that came on, and man, it just freaking grabbed me. And it's been like that was really where it started, where I was just like, what's happening? Like, this is amazing. And so from there, I got into writing songs and playing piano and guitar and all the lame, boring 13-year-old stuff that everybody does. And eventually got into band, marching. Well, it wasn't marching band; it was like concert brass band. But then grew tired of that and sold my trumpet for a multi-track recorder. And it was like this Fostex X32 or something like that. And you'd put a cassette player in, and you could do 4 tracks. And as a teenager in high school, but this was before like really there were home studios based around computers, and it just grabbed me. And I was like, "This is the coolest thing ever." And then I found out that I could major in that in college. And I was like, wait a minute, that means free access to recording studios. Let's do it. And I had been, continuing to write and play. And I eventually in college, like I had all these songs I had written, and I started showing up at open mics with my guitar. And it blew my mind because people liked it. And I remember really clearly, as like a freshman in college, I was playing this song I had written, and I was really into it. It's kind of a slower, quieter song. And I opened my eyes, and this pretty big coffee shop that we had at my college was full of people, and everyone was silent and was looking at me as I played the song. And I was like, whoa, cool. This is awesome. And so I just leaned into that, and I started recording CDs of my own music with other producers and stuff, and eventually myself. And then I would use the money that I would make from selling CDs to buy more recording gear. And then, inevitably back then in the early 2000s, people would be like, how'd you get a CD? And I'd be like, I can make one for you. Let's make a record together. And that turned into production. And eventually that turned into mixing and mastering. And eventually I realized if I was mastering my own mixes, I hated it. But if I was mastering somebody else's mixes, it was pretty much my favorite thing I had done that didn't involve holding the guitar. And so I started just sort of pitching myself to people as like a mastering engineer. Got a lot of great feedback from it. And one of my mentors, this guy, Chris Pyle, was like, Chris, you're really good at this. He owned the first studio I worked at. And he was like, you're really good at this. You could do this for a living. And I was, basically like, ha! Like, there's no, you can't get customers for this. Sure, maybe I'm good at mastering, but like, I'm never going to be able to build a full-time job out of it. Like, how do you meet enough musicians and bands?
How do you go from that to like Bob Ludwig, right?
Yeah, how do you do that? I was like, that's not a thing. So a few years later, I did a little thought experiment, and I was getting ready to go to bed. It was probably like midnight, and I asked myself an important question, probably the most important question I had asked myself yet at that point, which was, let's imagine it's 5 years from now, and you're a successful mastering engineer. How did you do it? And right away, I was like, well, people don't really understand what mastering is, so I guess I'd have like a website, obviously, and on the website, I guess there'd be like a dial, and you would choose a genre of song that I had mastered, and then it would immediately begin to play, and there'd be 2 buttons, before and after, and you could switch back and forth between before I mastered it and after I mastered it. And then it was this like, wait a minute, that would work. Like I could,
It's almost like a startup idea. You know?
yeah, it was. And I stayed up till like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I still have it somewhere, but I sketched out all these ideas for what my before and after player would look like. And I found a friend that specialized in that type of web development, and I hired him, and he built it. And I was like, okay, cool, this is awesome. I'm going to run some ads on Google and see what happens. And within a few days, a stranger named Greg sent me a check for $350 to master his record. It was the first person that, like, we didn't have any mutual acquaintances. He just got to my website and was like, cool, he's pretty good at this mastering thing. I'm going to hire him. And I couldn't believe it. And there was this magic moment of like, wait a minute, there might be more Gregs out. This is going to work. And so I'd take a little bit of the money that I made from each project and I'd sink it back into ads, and more people would hire me and more people would hire me. And I just started spending more and more and more money on ads, and I started making more and more money. And before I knew it, I was making like $150K a year before expenses. And I was like, holy crap, like I'm doing it. But at the time, I didn't realize how insane it was that I had a skill, made a website, learned how to run ads, managed an ad budget appropriately, and grew a one-person freelancer business to $150,000 in sales in just a couple years. And
yeah, it's actually kind of really crazy because I don't really know any other audio engineers that make their career like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know anyone else who did that. It's all like word of mouth and then a very slow kind of spiral.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I don't think I've heard of anybody else that's kind of just made a career like that. You know, it's a very interesting way.
Well, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
I didn't know how weird it was, but I knew, and I skipped over a lot of my story here, but like I did it by reading business books. I would like get these, there's a lot of business books that are targeted towards small businesses, and I would read these business books. And for some reason, I have a really terrible memory. If I'm in a conversation with somebody and it gets even slightly emotional, I don't remember what the other person has said. Worst case scenario, I remember completely something different than what they actually said, and it creates all these problems for me. If I'm reading in a book, I seem to retain it for a long amount of time, and I can combine things from different books I've read into new information. And so I just did this again and again with my business. And, you know, by the time Brian and I started the 6 Freegram Studio podcast, I had probably read, 60 or so business books, and I'd started reading biographies of famous people and businessmen as well. And I thought it was like my secret. I thought it was like my edge. I was like, none of my other competitors are reading business books, and that's why I'm growing. I must be growing faster than they are. And when Brian and I became friends through a mastermind that we were part of, we bonded because we were both reading these business books like crazy. And so like I went down to Nashville for Summer NAMM and stayed at his place. And we literally, like the first hour and a half of us hanging out was just us like showing each other spreadsheets that we had made for our businesses. It was so nerdy. And we finally like caught up with our other buddies from our mastermind, and they're like we were wondering where you guys were. We were like joking about you guys were probably looking at spreadsheets. And Brian and I like looked at each other like,
should we tell them?
We were looking at spreadsheets. And so we became like fast friends, and we started doing the podcast. And for me, it was just an excuse to hang out with them. And podcasting was great because it's audio. Like I know a little bit about audio, and we're just going to talk about business for recording studios. And before I knew it, people from Israel were hitting me up and wanted to go to lunch with me. And I was like, this is crazy. And it got weirder because like I would start showing up at like NAMM and stuff like this, and people would just walk up to me and be like, dude, I love the show. Or I started getting Instagram direct messages and Facebook messages. And eventually, right before the pandemic hit, like I'd get like 5 or 6 messages a day from just like random people who are like, hey man, podcast changed my life. I'm like, what the
Oh my God.
Like this is crazy. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know how to handle it. And it definitely went to my head, and it definitely like forced me to deal with a lot of issues that I had not dealt with yet. This is weird. So now, like, I set out to brand myself as a mastering engineer, and now I'm like the business systems guy in the recording studio space and for creatives as a whole. So, like, I don't know. Like, to be honest, it's frustrating because when it came to growing the mastering business, I knew what I was doing. Like, there's all kinds of books about it. with what I'm doing now with like podcasting and business coaching now, like, and running this whole influencer thing or whatever, like I my skin crawls to even like refer